Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Superpowers. And I'm really excited today because we have with us Alan Hugenot. And I had a great introduction to Alan at the IANDS conference. He spoke this year as well as the previous year. And Alan is an NDEer, and Alan is also a physicist, and he is also a mechanical engineer, and we'll talk a little bit more about those things. Alan had a wonderful presentation this year at IANDS 2016, and if you wanted to check that out afterwards, we have all the VODs from IANDS available on streamingforthesoul.com. And so you can find it there. And we also have right now we're having a sale on the VODs. We have a 50% discount, and Alan's in particular is a wonderful VOD to watch because it's really going to help you shape your thinking and just how you look at physical reality and the way that your consciousness integrates with physical reality, and not only integrates but actually creates it. So we're going to talk about all that too. So anyway, you can find Alan's as well as the rest of the VODs on streamingforthesoul.com. And I think with that, I would like to just jump in and talk to Alan and let you all hear in his words a little about his story. So let's see if that worked. And there we are. There's Alan Hugenot, everybody. Hello, Alan.
Hi, Carl.
How are you?
I'm doing fine this morning.
Good. It was such a pleasure to watch your presentation at IANDS, and also I think probably the big highlight for me was afterwards when my 15-year-old daughter, who has not yet taken a physics class in high school, looked at me and she said, "Dad, I love that. I understood everything he was saying." And I just think that's great. So I think we'll do a little bit of that for our audience, because I know they'll understand what you're saying too. But so what I'd like to do, real quick, if we can, is I'd like to just start with your NDE, because there are elements about that and things that I think are sort of just an important foundation. So can you tell everybody just a little bit about your NDE?
Yeah, it was my NDE took place back in 1970, and this was before Raymond Moody wrote his book Life After Life, and so the term NDE didn't exist. Nobody knew. It was 5 years before that, and so I was killed in a motorcycle wreck, and I say killed because that's how it appears to me at this point. I was in the hospital for 33 days. I had head injuries. I had breaks all through my body. My femur, that's your thigh bone, was in about 400 pieces, and they couldn't put a pin down the middle. They had to put steel on both sides. So I still have this steel in my legs. So I was in a coma for 12 hours, and while I was in that coma, I went to the other side. I had the typical near-death experience. We all have different parts of the total experience, as you would find if you read Moody's book, but there's 12 things that usually happen. For instance, I went directly to the light. I don't remember going through a tunnel and arriving there, like most people do. And anyway, I had a typical experience with the light. People ask, "What did that feel like?" And I say, "Oh, it was like being at home, more at home than anything I've ever done anywhere." It was as if the light was me. It was a part of me. I'd known this light for this being. It was a being, but it was a light. It was a white light, kind of gold around the edge, and just an energy, and not with a face exactly or anything. But I'd known this light for thousands of years. I've known it, and it was me. I was home with myself.
Right.
So there's no introduction. So this light didn't say I'm Krishna, I'm God, I'm Buddha, or something else. It's none of that. Just I'm here with you, you're here with me. We know each other.
Right.
And it was very wonderful. And I can't wait to get back. I tell people that in my book. I say, best thing that ever happened to me was I got killed. You know,
Which is unusual because that's not really the top of everybody's list of the best things that ever happened to them.
It's the end of their bucket list, not on the, you know.
Right, yeah. The very
So,
last thing I'd like to do.
so but I got such an experience there. And then I came back and I wanted to tell everybody. And of course, the nurses would come and they'd say, "Be quiet, Alan, the doctor's coming." I said, "No, I want to tell him. I want to tell him." And I tell the doctors. So finally, they were trying to put me literally in the nut house, in an asylum, which we still had asylums before 1981. We still had those.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they wanted to commit me because I didn't conform to their standard thinking.
Right. Yeah.
And so finally, my orthopedic surgeon checked me out of the hospital. All of a sudden, one afternoon, he came running in, grabbed my clothes, put me in a wheelchair, threw the clothes in my lap, took me down the freight elevator out the back door. And my mom already had the car there. He put me in the car and we drove away. So that they were trying that afternoon to commit me. It was 5 days before I was supposed to be discharged. And I went home. And then I tried to tell, of course, the preacher, you know, I mean, he's going to listen to me. I'm talking about afterlife. And he said, "No, Alan, that does not agree with Scripture, so it couldn't be real." And I said, "Wait a minute, I'm trying to tell you my story here, where I've been." So I was, at the time, I was a physics student, undergraduate student in college. And I'd never thought about any of this stuff. I was sort of a normal guy like everyone else. I was thinking about getting a date and, you know, that sort of thing. And that's, you know, I was a Vietnam vet and I was back in college and find the woman and all that stuff, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And here, all of a sudden, I knew this thing nobody's interested in.
Right.
And visceral knowledge of an inconvenient truth that, you know, we don't die. And, you know, nobody wants to hear it. So I kind of clammed up and held it in and didn't talk about it. There wasn't any IANDS at that point. They started in 1978, 8 years later.
Right.
There was no place to go and talk about any of this.
Yeah.
And so I just closed it inside. And then I began to get involved in IANDS, the Institute for Near-Death Studies. In about 1997, I finally decided to get involved. They'd been around for some time before that. And I became a professional member because I wanted to read, as a scientist, I wanted to read their journal and get all their professional stuff. And then the Hubble telescope came in 1998. Mm-hmm. And the Hubble telescope allowed us to look at novas happening at a distance like we've never seen before. We realized the universe almost has no end. We don't know where the end is out there. It's way bigger than we ever thought. And it's expanding faster and faster. We always thought it was slowing down due to gravity. Well, now that's throwing all our theories off. And the best explanation they came up with was dark energy and dark matter, that we actually only discern 4% of the universe and 96% we don't see. Well, this agreed with what I was trying to tell everybody. Hey, there's a whole bunch more out there. I was studying Newtonian in college, and I saw it was a little box in the corner, and there was all this rest of us we didn't know about that was out there.
Right.
I wanted to tell everybody about this, what I today call the conscious universe. And so here, the Hubble telescope gave me, in science, finally said, we don't know 96% of everything. And I said, yeah, I knew that. It made so much sense to me. And so then I began to get very active in this work. And I began to write my first book, which took about 8 years, because it was a cathartic experience for me to work out all the details and how all these things work together. And what I realized in that first book is the near-death experience. People who remember past lives, like the children that remember their past lives at the University of Virginia.
Right.
Mediumship, all these things are talking about the same thing, a consciousness survival in an afterlife.
Right.
And that's what it is. And that our soul or our spirit or our consciousness, and I like to use the word consciousness, survives physical death.
Right.
And from my experience with the light, I will say we were here before this physical life because I knew that light. I was home again. That was me.
Yeah.
And it's out there. So I believe my consciousness is actually outside the body someplace and exists like in the cloud, and my body's like the cell phone.
Right.
So,
yeah.
cell phone. And my body is just what I'm using to have this soul phone experience. I could be using the computer or the iPad. I mean, I could pick a different body.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
my
Well, and you'll upgrade one day.
consciousness is over there in the cloud somewhere. Okay.
Yeah.
Not picking a harp on a cloud, but little angel. But it's in the cloud someplace, and that's how that works. And that's the best analogy I can give to it.
Yeah.
So I began to really look into things, and I always knew when I studied quantum electrodynamics, and I use that term on purpose. I don't say quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics sounds like a materialist thing with mechanics going on, with levers and
right. Yeah.
And it's not. It's quantum electrodynamics. That's what the founders called it.
Mm-hmm.
And quantum electrodynamics is something that has no substance. It is a field. It is
right.
only a field. And it's a field of potentiality. We called it the Schrodinger's wave function. And to precipitate that wave function, which is all the potential that anything could be, is out there, the wave function precipitates and becomes matter, becomes reality, becomes what we experience. And the way that happens, and we show it in the double slit experiment, and I love that cartoon that I show in my, which is available on the live streaming. With that video shows in 5 minutes all of quantum dynamics so that anyone can understand it, quantum electrodynamics. And it shows that the photon, when it passes through the double slit experiment, if we're watching it, trying to observe it, it knows we're observing.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing, because that means the photon is conscious. It knows we're observing, or it's involved in our consciousness, or it's attached to all of consciousness. Somehow it knows we're observing, and therefore decides to precipitate as matter so that we can see it.
Right.
And that is once you see that and understand what's really happening right there, you get it, that if the photon is conscious, then the universe must totally be conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And when people say God is in everything, or pantheism, yes, the consciousness is what's running everything. And people want to turn that into a God that's got a personality and everything, but it's not. It's the source. It's the force. It's the power that runs the universe.
Yeah.
How that is. And we've tried to explain that power in many ways, in many religions and otherwise, many philosophies. We haven't nailed it down yet. We know that it's a power that runs the universe, and I call it the conscious universe, and that's what my book is about. The title of it is The New Science of Consciousness Survival and the Meta-Paradigm Shift to a Conscious Universe. And that came out in May of this year, and that was a response when my first book came out. Chapter 6 was about quantum field theory and consciousness, and everybody wanted me to talk about that. It came out in 2012, and everybody wanted me to talk about it.
Right, yeah.
6, they didn't care so much about my near-death experience. They wanted to hear the science. They wanted that work. And
out of curiosity, Alan, do you attribute any of just who you are and who you've become and I mean, going from a place of, when you had this NDE and now you had this information really that you wanted to share with people that they just didn't want to hear because it didn't fit their paradigm, and now, and moving into, the QED, which is kind of the same thing. There's this group of, scientists and the materialist scientist Newtonian thinking. They don't want to hear about it either. You kind of have chosen a role coming into this lifetime where you're kind of ringing the bell and bringing down or just opening people's eyes to, wait a second, there's something beyond these walls of belief that you've put around yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm currently studying how that works, how that kind of thinking that I have differs from their thinking.
Right.
And we think very differently. And the two people I'm reading are Charles Fillmore, who started the School of Practical Christianity known as Unity, and Wolfgang von Goethe, and what Rudolf Steiner has to say about him. And they have this different view of science, that science is to be taken all at once as an aha experience. And that's how you learn things. You go into you connect with spirit on the inside, and you're still alive as the physical on the outside, but you then get insights by observing the world, and they have a different way of observing. Scientists, materialists, take things apart. They kill the thing. You can't look at life if you're taking it apart. You killed it.
Right.
You have to see the epiphenomena that occurs, the things that occur when the whole thing's put together.
Right.
And I love to explain it this way. If you look at chemistry, chemists are interested in the results of combining things.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of science is tearing things apart. If you try to use reductionist materialist thinking and we're studying water, it would be hydrogen and oxygen. You take it apart, you'd have hydrogen, you'd have oxygen, you'd study oxygen to death, and you study hydrogen to death, and you might have a fire when the two got together because you start oxygenating the hydrogen, you have a big fire, your whole laboratory burns down.
Right.
And you use water to put out the fire, but you never discover water because you're still looking at hydrogen and oxygen. You're never going to discover what water can become, the epiphenomena of ice and fog and rain and all of that, and clouds. You're never going to discover any of that because you're looking at oxygen and hydrogen and separating them. You never see what they become, what they combine to become. Where Fillmore and Goethe and Steiner are looking at how to see the whole thing and see the reality of it living and put together, and then what does it do in its relationship to the universe.
Yeah.
And it's a different science, a different way of looking.
Right.
And so I'm studying now why I look at things differently. Well, it was because I went to the light, and I never could see things the same after that. I always looked differently. Always learned to look with my heart, and then try and analyze what my heart had learned.
Right. Yeah.
It's a different way.
So let's go back to your book a little bit, and let's go back to QED and also just this this concept that is really shown and proven by the quantum electrodynamics and the double slit, where, because what's happening when you're saying that the wave is collapsing into a particle when it knows it's being observed or when it's being acted upon by consciousness, this is essentially, people have heard this in different ways. It came out in a big way. Let's just go back, to The Secret. And, and it was saying, that your intention is interacting with this consciousness and with the universe, and the universe is responsive to it, And it also, we for those who remember Jane Roberts' books and Seth Speaks, he's spoke much about how consciousness creates form. So I love that, and I want you to just speak a little bit more to it, how that these things are now coming into a different sort of view because now there is science that's actually backing it up.
Okay, well, what we've done, we've looked at materialist science, and we found that the 6 first principles that underlie materialism are all false preconceptions, presuppositions, which were assumed to be self-evident 350 years ago when they started science, like reality. Well, it's real. It's actually out there. We don't have to prove it. We've never proven that it's there. And the one that I like to use is locality and non-locality. And so I'll talk about locality and non-locality for a second.
Okay.
Locality is the space and time that we see here, the space and dimension. Okay, we see that there is space. But this is a construction that our mind uses because we've proven non-locality, and John Bell's theory has been proven now, I think, a dozen times. Very expensive experiments, and we've proven that there is no space. It's an illusion.
Right.
We've proven that scientifically. That space is an illusion. The fact that you and I are separated is an illusion. The miles between us are just an illusion. We've proven it. And so non-locality proves that space is junk science. It's not true. And the materialist viewpoint is based on 6 principles, of all of which we've now disproven with quantum electrodynamics and non-locality.
Right.
And so what's happening with that photon is it's responding to us looking at it. It's becoming the reality that we expect with our intention. Our intention creates the reality around us. And when we look at how often that matter reappears from the void or from the 0-point field, it annihilates and rematerializes at 23 septillion times a second. Every 10 yoctoseconds, 23 septillion times. That sept means seven. Okay,
Jeez.
yeah. A trillion is 3. Okay, okay, septillion times a second. So basically, you and I both are an electrical field that's a continually reappearing apparition where we are, and we just come in and we go bzzz, where this vibration, we reappear and rematerialize out of the void 23 septillion times a second. We're just going bzzz. And so when my hand moves like this, it doesn't really move. It stops being there and it reappears here, and it stops being there and reappears here. It doesn't go like that. It reappears.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we think, well, it just went across there
Mm-hmm.
because that's the way our perspective is constructed.
Right. Right.
Construct this perspective. Our mind, our eyes only see electrical impulses. They don't see the vision that we see. They
Right.
see electrical impulses and interpret it as that vision.
Yes. Yeah.
Interpretation in here. And so the reality, we can't even prove that it's actually there now.
That's actually pretty amazing. And just, for people who are familiar with something else, just to give you an idea of how rapid that is, film is also, when you watch a movie, it's a series of static frames. That's only 24 frames per second. So you think about 23 septillion flashes of information, and you see that there's quite a different. I would think that was real too. So
David Eagleman calls it our Umwelt, that what we have around us, our Umwelt. And Suzanne Giesman was talking about the snail looking at an apple, and the snail only sees something every 3 seconds. And if you grab the apple that's sitting next to the snail and take it away, and he looks at, every 3 seconds he takes a frame.
Right.
He doesn't see you take the apple, and he says, "Oh, what happened?"
It was magic.
It's magic, and so she uses that to show how our perspective, 24 frames and so forth, how we don't know what we don't see.
Right.
And I believe that the spirit life, or deceased people who are now in spirit, are, when we shed the body, when we die, we shed the body, and we go to the next dimension, which would be a 4th dimension or a 5th dimension. And it doesn't matter which one it is. Everybody starts, oh, is it the 7th dimension? Where are we? They start worrying about those little details. Those details don't matter. Yeah. We go to another vibration at a higher level.
Yeah.
And then they want to know, where exactly is that? I don't know exactly. So, but we go to another vibration, and we're here at the same place that we are right now. We're all in the same spot. They're in the room with us. We just can't see them at this moment. Apparently, from what we get through mediumship and otherwise, coming back from the other side, apparently they can see us at certain levels on the other side.
Right.
We can't see them, but they can see us. And so that's very interesting stuff.
Yes.
That doesn't mean grandma's going to bed with you and your wife. No, grandma's not watching you. Okay.
Right.
I used to
okay.
I would worry about that a little bit, Is grandma watching?
No. She's
not. So they don't interfere with us, but they can be right here and participate with us if they do, and if we take notice of them. And that's what we're doing a lot of work now on, how to notice them. I'm doing a lot of work with Gary Schwartz. We're going to do some real noticing in the next couple of years.
That is so fun. That is so cool. A question for you about that. The perception element. So when we're here and when we're focused on the 3rd dimension, what you were talking about, in terms of the brain interpreting, electrical signals, and that's what's creating the image. So how does consciousness then perceive differently when we aren't in this physical form? Do we know anything about that? What the mechanics of that might be that are just different from what it is that we're experiencing here?
We don't know a lot about that. What I can tell you is this: our 5 senses are distractions. They distract us, and they keep us grounded in the 3D plus time. And when we go to our what we call our sixth sense or intuition, when we go to the inner mind, the I am that lives inside us, when we go in through meditation or otherwise, or a near-death experience, when we go inside, we're going to that place where we're not distracted by the five senses. And when we arrive there, that we're then in contact with the entire universe. And that's how we mediums do. We go, and I do mediumship. I hadn't talked about that, but I've studied at Arthur Findlay College and stuff.
Yes.
Because as a scientist, I wanted to know about it.
Right.
And so I've spent 10 years studying it, and it's very interesting. But what we're doing when we connect with that consciousness that's the universe, we're all information is accessible to us, and that's how we get what grandma's doing, and we get the message, and we get her name and her hair color and everything about her, and we tell you all this evidence. Right. And that's what I see at Arthur Findlay is how to get that evidence so that knows I actually got the data. How did I get the data? That's the most fun when I'm at the Noetic Society, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, working with Dr. Dean Radin and Dr. Arna DeLorme, and they're measuring my head and stuff, what I'm doing as a medium.
Right.
It's so much fun because we have proven it's coming from outside of me. Where's it coming from? Where am I getting this stuff? But it's out there. And that consciousness, in my picture of how it works and the way I explain it, and again, when I'm explaining science, it's my theories. They're hypotheses. Mm-hmm. They seem pretty real, and we got good data. We don't have any data against it, but it's my idea of how this must be. It's not the gospel or something printed in stone somewhere.
Yeah, understood.
It's our intention that moves the universe. And again, back to Goethe, he says, when you finally decide, the universe moves.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Most of us wish and we want, but we don't decide.
Yeah.
When you know this is it, the universe makes it happen. But you have to know first. And everybody says, well, I believe, I think, I want, I wish. No, you got to know.
Yeah.
No. Here it comes. And whatever, your whole life is what you know.
Right.
And once you know it, it precipitates in front of you. The whole universe works to precipitate what you know. Mm-hmm. And that intention is so important.
Right.
And this is how positive thinking works, and also how it doesn't work.
Yeah. Right.
It's what do you know?
Now, just going back to the NDE and that experience for you, was the mediumship something that was kind of a superpower that came back with you? Is that something that opened up to you then as a result of the near-death experience?
Yes, but not right away, because I had to close up and shut up.
Right.
The minute I came back, I realized I was more emphatic with everything. I'm empath, and so I had to learn to have two personalities. There's the empath, and when I go to mediumship and I become totally empathic, I feel everybody in the room. I get very emotional. I tear up. I choke up. I can hardly. I'm really, and I'm going there right now, and so you can see it happening. I'm going to come back out of it, go back to the other one, and now I'm back to the other one, and it's just like that. I go over into this shifted state.
Yeah.
And I had that right away when I came back from the near-death experience, and I had to close it up, put it away, and not do it. And I had to learn how to live a life. I was a naval architect, marine engineer, and I designed ships, and I used Newtonian physics to the hydrodynamics, and that's what I did.
Right.
A whole career out of it, and I had to shut down and be this other person. I'll call that the professor, who's the guy who you talk to when you're talking the science. And
right.
It was only after I decided, okay, now I'm approaching retirement and I can study mediumship. And that was 10 years ago. And I said, okay, I can now go into studying mediumship. And I went whole hog into studying it. And I've done lots of mediumship work. I'm very good at demonstrations. I do a lot of work at spiritualist churches, actually, and where I do the demonstration. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of fun. I can stand there and get 5 spirits by name, hair color, everything, get all the details. And then when I do the statistics later, how could I have guessed this? It's 320 billion to 1 that I could have guessed that series. It happens just like that. And I say, oh, isn't that cool? It's not me at all. It's
right.
The conscious universe dumping this stuff through me because there's somebody in the room that needs that.
Right.
So they say, well, am I reading their mind? And am I reading somebody else's mind? Well, we don't know. We're doing the science on this stuff to find out exactly how we do this.
Right.
But it's so amazing to me and to the people that I don't even know the person I'm talking to.
Mm-hmm.
I have never met them before. And I say, you there with the brunette, yeah, you. I think I have your grandmother here, and her name was Alma. And she died I think she died in about 1975. Yeah, and again, these crazy details. I got her name when she died, and she had, actually, she had a very rare form of disease, and then they'll tell me the name of the disease, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know I don't get the name maybe,
Right.
and then I go on. There's a lot of this interplay back and forth, which science says, well, you're reading their mind. Okay, if I'm reading their mind, maybe that's how it happens. I don't
Right.
know, but it
Yeah.
sure seems to me to be what the mediums have been saying for 2,500 years of recorded history. It's that deceased spirit talking in my ear, telling
Yes.
me.
Right. Right.
That's what it appears to be to me.
Mm-hmm.
And having gone to see that white light, that being of white light,
Yeah.
I have to say that's the best evidence I have. It is them talking to me, an aspect
Right.
of their consciousness talking to me from the other side.
Yeah. Well, and what a great handshake for you, the mediumship, and then also the quantum electrodynamics, just in terms of continuing to find ways to support this this notion and this concept that the survival of the consciousness, and the consciousness existed before the physical form, and the consciousness exists beyond the physical form and afterwards. And it's like you said, you're just dropping into, like, this is your car, and you're jumping into your body as your car, and you jump in, you drive around on Earth for a while, and then you get out of your car, and maybe you get a new car, maybe you do something else, but a question for you would. So science thinks that you're reading the thoughts of that person. Possibly, that's what's being postulated. So the question would be, for people, and you probably do this too, who do the mediumship remotely. Let's say you're, on the telephone, or you're,
Right?
and they're on the other side of the planet, and you're still getting this information. Does the space element bother a materialist Newtonian at all, or you're still reading their thoughts?
It the space thing would bother a Newtonian, because they want to think that the energy level gets less and less as you get more distance involved. But again,
Yes.
distance is an illusion, and we understand that now.
Right.
So that no longer applies. See, with quantum electrodynamics and non-locality totally take out materialism. It just
Yeah.
nothing applies anymore. It's time to shift and add this. The consciousness is how it works, and we don't know exactly how that consciousness works. We can't even hardly define consciousness scientifically yet.
Right.
And we know that consciousness is real. And I believe if you go down to string theory, and you use string theory to think about quarks and gluons, what are they made out of? They're made out of a vibration. Well, what is that vibration? It's a thought. It's a piece of consciousness. A chunk of consciousness is a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
And we each have our own chunk of consciousness. And if you put all those consciousnesses together, like if we're each a grain of sand and you have this great big beach full of sand, it's a pretty smart place. With all
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so consciousness is as Max Planck says, is the matrix of reality. He says mind is the matrix of reality. And that's a translation. And really, he's saying consciousness is a matrix of reality.
Right.
And thinking that way, that everything's made out of consciousness and not made out of substance, it's made out of consciousness. And if you look at the way that in quantum electrodynamics, the way the wave function collapses into reality, okay, the Schrodinger wave function collapses into reality,
Right.
from potential into something. You think about the Big Bang and the start of the universe. The best theory that we have is the Big Bang. What happened at the Big Bang? There had to be a consciousness there to observe the wave function to precipitate the bang. I mean, you can't.
Yep.
Consciousness outside of physics observing the wave function collapse. And so it had to have so there, you can call that God if you wish to. I'd rather call that conscious universe. The universe is conscious, and the consciousness says, okay, now I'm going to do this. We're going to have a universe, wham, there it is.
Yeah.
And that's how that happened. So consciousness precedes matter and will be here after matter.
Right.
Okay. Understanding that becomes a religious viewpoint. Well, we call it in science, we call it an ontology, a way of seeing our relation to the universe. And church people call it religion, but we all have a religion. Even an atheist has a religion.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't realize it. It's his religion, his ontology, his relation to the universe.
Yeah.
Okay, so consciousness is the key to this whole thing. And Max Planck said that mind is a matrix of matter in 1900. This is almost 120 years ago now. It's a long time back.
Right.
And those German scientists knew that.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten that all of the Nobel laureates who gave us quantum electrodynamics were into Hinduism, and they were reading the Vedas, and they're trying to figure out consciousness. All of them were.
Right.
And even Newton was an alchemist. So this is all historic fact. Where were they getting their stuff? They were getting it from consciousness.
Right.
And they knew it.
Well, something too that Einstein is quoted as having said is that imagination is actually more important than knowledge, and so you can see in their process, it's more of the top-down process, really, where they're going out to the realm of consciousness and the realm of imagination to muse about that versus taking, a frog and cutting it open and musing about that.
Materialism is bottom up, and you can't do it that way. You have to start at the top and then come down. And that's what consciousness is. And the paradigm is shifting. Scientists are shifting.
Yeah.
And as Max Planck said, science advances one funeral at a time. As the old guys off, the younger guys will get it because they've heard of it.
Well, it's funny because in a strange way, I see you as no different from, Galileo going, no, I really think from what I'm observing that the earth is round and not flat. And that there were strong arguments against that. And yet he continued, and I just find that I suppose there's always going to be some element of, belief system or religion type element to even science. If something's going to get put forward, everybody's going to go accept that, and that just becomes the new set of walls around our thinking.
Absolutely. And I call religions belief systems, and then I abbreviate it as BS. Because everyone has their own little BS, whatever they think.
Right.
And none of us agree. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat.
Right.
One's a Catholic, one's a Jew, one's an atheist, one's a Muslim. We all have a little BS, our belief system. And so if you look at it that way, it puts all belief systems on the same level. Yeah. They're all slightly wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you know what they are, what it is, it's that analogy of the six blind men, each touching their spot on the elephant. So it's true for them, but they're in their own bubble and they aren't experiencing what anybody else is experiencing. So, there's just the limitation of their own bubble, their own experience that kind of does that.
So I'm trying to get everybody to understand that their bubble is their own BS. They don't take it too seriously.
Right.
And they're open to hear the next guy's story, and maybe the next guy has a piece of truth they need.
Yeah.
He's part wrong too, but maybe part of what he's got's really true.
Right.
And so that's how we find the truth, is by allowing everything.
Yeah.
And not condemning it just because we don't understand it.
Right. Right. I do have to say this, and I want everybody out in our audience to know this too, that your book is a blast, and it's so much fun to read, because of how clearly you're able to shine a light on the belief systems element and the rejection of new evidence by current thinking. And you really you don't pull any punches, which is kind of where the fun is.
Yeah, and that book is the red book. There's two books if you go on Amazon. And the blue one is earlier, and it's a great book too. But the red book is the one you want. It's the science, the new science of consciousness survival.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually showing that on the screen right now for the viewers, just so that they can see the cover. And I have a little thing that part of your foreword that you wrote there, and just so everyone can see that. And by the way, just so that so people know this, my daughter Violet, again, who's 15, who you met at the IANDS conference, is loving this book, and she is completely understanding this book. So it isn't as though what you're saying, what you're discussing, is theoretical and equations and things that are not understood. It's very practical, very easy to understand. I mentioned this to you yesterday when we were talking, just that, Albert Einstein used to say that you don't really fully understand something unless you can explain it to your grandmother. And so, folks, I just want you to know Alan fully understands this, because you'll read it and you will get it, and you may even think you're the smartest person in the world after you've read the book, because you will understand it.
Okay, and the thing that's also in the book is at the end of each chapter, I have all the videos that are available on YouTube that explain what I just said, and all the scientists and stuff. So you can do a lot of research, fun research, watching videos after you read each chapter.
Yeah.
And I put it so that you don't have to be a scientist at all to understand it.
No.
And it's available on Kindle also at Amazon.
Oh,
so
great.
You can put
Okay.
it on your iPhone and your iPad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful book, and I think that what I enjoy about it is having spent so much time, reading channeled material that was talking about consciousness creates form, and then moving into things like The Secret. They're talking about how to actually make that work. There are little things in there that really sort of illuminate that. And now this is another level to it, and we're hearing it again and again. When Dr. Eben Alexander was at the IANDS conference last year, and he's former neurosurgeon, and his whole belief system was what medical science thinks, which is that the brain is creating consciousness and as a result of physical form, versus what he learned as a result of his NDE, which he is now upsetting the medical community with to a great degree by telling them, nope, we had it backwards. It's really consciousness that creates form.
Yes, I met another neurosurgeon, Marjorie Woolacott, at this last convention that we did at the IANDS, and she is in the same place as he is.
Right.
And she had a near-death experience, and she was, hers wasn't as dramatic as his or anything else, but she's a neurosurgeon, and we're making inroads into the biological world and the medical world. We've actually, most physicists don't argue with us anymore. They're kind of on our side, because they do know about all the Nobel laureates were there.
Right.
And so physicists are no longer arguing. And now biology and the medical world are coming our way rapidly.
Yeah.
And it's
exciting.
I'll put it this way. 46 years ago, they wanted to throw me in the nut house. And now they invite me to be the guest speaker. So gotta be, something's happened. We're making progress.
Yeah, something has definitely happened.
There's been a shift, and the shift is happening more and more rapidly.
Yeah.
What Schopenhauer says is, first they fight you, first they laugh at you, and then they fight with you, and then suddenly they say, "Oh, I knew that." we're moving to the stage where they're all going to say, "Oh, I always knew that. I never disagreed with that."
Yeah.
And they're all going to go to the conscious universe all of a sudden.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I like, one of the other things that you talked about and you discussed was that uh, we are already employing technologies that use and prove that QED actually does exist, and so by being a denier, you're saying in effect that certain things that we're very familiar with are can't exist then.
Okay, so quantum electrodynamics requires a consciousness outside of physics to precipitate matter.
Right.
Okay, you know that. So quantum electrodynamics is the most proven theory we've ever had because it gives us the transistor. Without QED, you don't have the transistor. And so if you want to be a materialist and not believe the implications about consciousness that are contained within quantum electrodynamics, you have to give up all your transistors, your TVs, your cell phones, everything with a transistor in it. And everything today that's electronic has transistors. So
Right.
you have to give up everything and be a pure materialist, and don't use your cell phone to call the other materialist and say how stupid we all are. Okay? You can't do that, because if you believe in your cell phone, you believe in quantum electrodynamics, and quantum electrodynamics requires consciousness outside of physics.
Yeah. Yeah.
In another dimension, which we find in dark matter and dark energy. And so all of our science points to what they want to say is not scientific. It points to what we believe, and all of us believe this conscious universe, and it says all of these things: mediumship, near-death experience, all of this is real. Past lives has got some truth to it. It's real. This stuff is there.
Right.
All of psi is true. That's what quantum electrodynamics says. And anyone who says, I don't believe that, well, then get rid of your cell phone. I'm sorry, you can't have one.
I'd love for it to, as they say, they don't believe that, for the cell phone to just vanish in their hand. Wouldn't that be great?
That would be good, wouldn't it?
And their TV vanish, and their computers and everything just go away.
You can't have transistors. Where's that to leave you with? You
Yeah.
can't even get in the house, probably. You can't get the front door open without a transistor. It's probably got one of those cipher locks.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, Alan, I want to thank you so much for just being here and chatting a little bit today, and talking about your NDE and also just what you've been working on, what you're studying, because it's wonderful. It's so useful. It's the kind of thing that people are hearing about, and I think that putting a little more understanding from the science side probably creates even more of a bridge to some thinking that most people aren't doing on a daily basis, just in terms of consciousness and the nature of our personal reality.
Yes. So, and if they want to hear that whole lecture, they can get your what you called it, a VOC or something?
A VOD. It's a
VOD.
yeah, it's video on demand is what it stands
Video
for.
on
So
demand, okay.
yeah. So thank you again for being here with us, though, and I appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. It's a lucky get to find a window with you.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
We'll talk next time.
All righty.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. And that's Alan Hugenot, and I highly, highly recommend that you get hold of a copy of Alan's book, because it's a great read. It's a really fun read, and it's also wonderful to see where he points them out very clearly, just where the conflicts are in a Newtonian kind of thinking versus the quantum electrodynamic type thinking. And also it substantiates everything that you're doing in terms of your deliberate creation of your reality through your intentions and through your thoughts. And it really tells us exactly how all that is happening. So you can find Alan's VOD on streamingforthesoul.com, and remember that's we have a sale right now on all of the IANDS video on demand, and it's 50% off. So they're all wonderful. Alan's is wonderful. There's just a great sampling of near-death experience presentations as well as Alan's, which is kind of a combination of the near-death experience and then how that has really changed his life and what that has gotten him into, and how he's really talking now just about ways that we can know that there or prove that there is surviving of the consciousness. So they're all great. You should go there. Also, we will link to Alan's book on streamingforthesoul.com. If you go to streamingforthesoul.com and click on the Superpowers link in the menu bar, you'll find Alan's book there. And we're also linked to his website if you want to find out anything more about Alan and see that. And so, and I would highly encourage it if you have any interest at all in kind of understanding a little bit more about the true nature of reality and how things work and how you interact with it. So thank you, everyone, for being here and on this Superpowers. And remember to go out there and experience the extraordinary.